The morning my son-in-law told me I had no legal claim to my own home, I was standing in my kitchen making oatmeal, the kind with brown sugar and a splash of cream, the way Elaine always made it. He said it like he was reading from a grocery list. Flat. Bored. Like the words weren't capable of destroying anything. I turned off the burner. I set down the spoon, and I looked at him for a long moment before I said anything at all. I should tell you something about that house first. Elaine and I bought it in 1987. A two-story on Heron Crescent in Oakville, Ontario. White siding, black shutters, a maple tree in the front yard that turned the color of fire every October. We paid $214,000 for it and thought we were crazy. Her mother thought we were crazy. Her mother thought we were crazy. My brother thought the market was about to crash. It didn't crash. 37 years later, a comparable house on that street sold for $1.8 million, and ours, with the addition we built in 2003 and the new roof Elaine picked out herself before she got sick, was appraised at just over $2 million. Elaine died in March of last year, pancreatic cancer. 14 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I was with her every single day, and I want you to know that I am not going to describe those 14 weeks to you, because some things belong only to the people who lived them. What I will tell you is that by the time the grief had settled into something I could carry, my son-in-law had already begun making plans for my house. His name is Preston. My daughter met him at a corporate retreat 7 years ago. He was in commercial real estate. She was in marketing. They had a wedding in Muskoka that cost more than my first car and my second car combined. And Elaine cried happy tears the whole day while I stood at the altar in a rented suit, trying not to embarrass anyone. I wanted to like Preston. I genuinely did. He had a firm handshake and remembered people's names and knew how to fill a room with the kind of confident talk that made everyone around him feel like they were being let in on something. For the first few years, I thought my daughter had done well for herself. Then Elaine got sick and I started to see things I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. Preston started showing up to the hospital a little less often. He had meetings. He had a conference in Calgary. He had things. My daughter was there every day. I want to be clear about that. She sat with her mother, held her hand, helped me navigate the palliative care paperwork that nobody warns you is the size of a filing cabinet. Whatever happened later, my daughter was there. But Preston would arrive for 20 minutes, make a point of speaking loudly with the nurses about quality of care, and then check his phone in the corner until it was acceptable to leave. After Elaine passed, he started calling her estate the assets. Not her things, not her belongings, the assets. The first time I heard him say it, I thought maybe I'd misheard. We were at my kitchen table, me and my daughter and Preston, and he was talking about what came next, and he used that word 3 times in 4 sentences. I set down my coffee cup and looked at my daughter, and she was looking at her hands. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with the region of Peel. I have reviewed more contracts, easements, property agreements, and infrastructure assessments than most people see in a lifetime. I am not a confused old man. I want you to understand that clearly before I go on. But Preston didn't know that. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore it. People in a hurry to get somewhere often underestimate whoever's standing between them and the door. 2 months after the funeral, my daughter called me and said they'd been thinking about the house. She said it carefully, her voice doing that thing it does when she's saying something Preston told her to say. I know my daughter. I've known her for 34 years. She has her mother's hands and her mother's way of going quiet when she's uncomfortable. She said the house was too big for me. She said the stairs were becoming a concern. She said that the carrying costs alone, property tax in Oakville, the utilities, the upkeep, were significant for someone on a fixed pension, and that perhaps it made more sense to sell, and that they had already spoken to a real estate contact of Preston's who thought the timing was excellent. I let her finish. I asked her if she wanted to come for dinner Sunday. She said yes. I made roast chicken, which was Elaine's recipe, and we didn't talk about the house. The following week, Preston came alone. He sat across from me at the kitchen table with a folder, an actual folder with printed pages inside it. He'd had someone prepare a document, Not a legal document, he was careful not to call it that, more of an overview. A summary of options. He slid it across the table like we were in a boardroom. The summary proposed that I sell the house, with the proceeds going into what he called a family trust structure that would be managed jointly. He'd circled that word. Jointly. He said it was for tax efficiency. He said the probate implications of having the house in my name alone, at my age, were something I should think carefully about. He said he and my daughter only wanted what was best for me. I read every page. I nodded at appropriate moments. I thanked him for his time. And after he left, I called a man named Gordon Ashworth had been Elaine's estate lawyer for 11 years. He drew up her will, her power of attorney, and the trust she'd quietly established in 2021 without telling Preston, without telling my daughter, and I'll be honest, without fully telling me either. Because Elaine was meticulous and private and she loved her family enough to plan for the worst in them. I had known Gord since a municipal easement dispute in 2008 when he represented the other side, and I developed a professional respect for the precision of his thinking. We had lunch twice a year. He sent me a card when Elaine died. He was the first person I called. I told him what Preston had done. I told him about the folder and the word jointly and the so-called trust structure. Gord was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Don, how much do you trust your daughter?" I thought about that for a while. I said, "I trust my daughter completely. I'm less certain about who she's become when he's in the room." Gord told me what to do next. Over the following 3 months, I did things I had never done in my life. I updated my own will. I established a proper testamentary trust, a real one, with an independent trustee, not a family member, not a son-in-law with a real estate license. I transferred the house into that trust. I documented every conversation with Preston, every visit, every email. I kept a notebook. Elaine had always kept notebooks for everything. Grocery lists, Christmas ideas, things the grandchildren said, and I found one she hadn't finished, a red one with a spiral binding, and I used the back half of it. Preston came back in October. This time he brought a woman he introduced as a financial planner. She had a very expensive bag and spoke entirely in phrases like estate optimization and generational wealth strategy. She left behind a brochure. I offered them both coffee. I was very pleasant. I asked good questions, and I said I'd think it over. In November, my daughter called me, and this time she was crying. She said Preston had told her that my resistance was putting the family in a difficult position. She said the house was eventually going to be hers anyway as the only child, and that the transition might as well happen in a way that made financial sense. She said I was being stubborn. That one landed differently than the others. I sat with that word for 3 days. Stubborn. I thought about the 31 years I'd gotten up at 6 in the morning and driven to work in the dark so that my daughter could take piano lessons and go to Queen's University and have a Muskoka wedding. I thought about the nights Elaine was in the hospital and I drove home alone and ate toast standing at the counter because I couldn't bear to sit at the table by myself. I thought about Heron Crescent in October and the maple tree and the way Elaine used to press her hand against the trunk every fall and say the same thing, "Still here." I called Gord on a Thursday. The estate reading was scheduled for the second week of January. It was at Gord's office on Lakeshore, a clean, quiet space on the 4th floor with a view of the lake and good coffee and bookshelves that went to the ceiling. My daughter came. Preston came in his good coat with a briefcase I'd never seen before. He shook Gord's hand with both of his, which is a thing people do when they want to seem sincere. We sat down. Gord opened the file. He began with Elaine's personal effects, the jewelry, the photo albums, the furniture she'd marked with small stickers years ago for my daughter, for her niece, for her book club friend who'd always admired the reading chair. He read through each one. Preston was very still, the way people are when they're waiting for the part that matters to them. Then Gord came to the property. He read the address, 14 Heron Crescent, Oakville, and he explained the trust structure, how the house had been placed into a testamentary trust, independently administered, with the right of residence belonging to me for the duration of my life. and the remainder interest passing to my daughter outright only upon my death. With no joint management structure, no co-trustee authority, and no mechanism by which a third party could exercise any control over, access to, or financial interest in the property during my lifetime. Preston's jaw moved, but no words came out. Gord kept reading. When he got to the line that specified that any attempt to challenge the trust structure through a third-party representative, and he looked up briefly at that point, just once, would trigger a legal costs provision that bound the challenger to cover all associated fees. Preston uncrossed and recrossed his legs. My daughter had her hands in her lap. She was looking at Preston. Then Gord set down the papers. He took off his reading glasses and placed them on the desk, and then he did something I hadn't expected. He smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that belongs to people who have seen a great many people sit across from them and believe they had already won. He said, "I think that covers the primary provisions." He paused. He said, "I should also mention that in September, Dawn and I updated the estate plan to reflect a revised beneficiary structure." He slid a separate document to the center of the table. "The trust now includes a charitable remainder provision. In the event that the property is ever contested, or the terms are legally challenged by any party, the residual estate value defaults entirely to the Oakville Community Foundation." He folded his hands. "Every dollar." The room was very quiet. Preston looked at the document. He looked at Gord. He looked at me. I looked back at him the way I looked at him that morning in my kitchen, when he told me I had no legal claim to my own home. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. My daughter started to cry. Not the managed crying she'd done on the phone in November. Something older than that. Something that sounded like the end of a long pretending. After the meeting, she and I sat in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons on the way back toward the highway. We didn't go inside. We just sat in my car with the engine running for the heat. And she said, "I didn't know it had gotten this far." I believed her. I still believe her. There are people in this world who are loved by someone who is very persuasive, and they can travel a long distance in a direction they never meant to go before they look up and realize how far they've come from themselves. I told her that. She asked me what happened now. I said, "We have roast chicken on Sundays. We start there." Preston moved out of their apartment in February. I don't know all the details, and I didn't ask. My daughter spent 3 weekends at my house in March, and we cleaned out her mother's closet together. Slowly, and we kept everything that mattered and donated the rest. And one afternoon she found a notebook, a red, spiral-bound one, the first half full of Elaine's handwriting, and she sat down on the floor of the bedroom and read every page. She didn't say anything when she finished. She just held it against her chest. I stood in the doorway of the room where I'd slept next to her mother for 36 years, and I thought about the morning in the kitchen with the oatmeal and the spoon and the burner I'd turned off, and how much of this I had carried alone, and how that was the right decision, and how I would make it again without hesitation. The maple tree in the front yard is still there. It'll go red again in October, same as it always has. I'm going to sit on the front step and watch it, same as I always have, in the house that is mine, that will one day belong to my daughter, that nobody else is going to take. Some things are worth protecting quietly, until the moment they no longer need to be quiet at all. I think about that kitchen table a lot. The folder Preston slid across it, the way he sat with his hands folded. Patient the way people are when they've already decided the outcome, and I think about how close it might have come to going differently. Not because I was weak, but because grief does something to your footing. It makes the ground feel less certain than it used to be, and there are people in this world who know how to move when they sense someone's footing has shifted. What I learned, and I don't say this lightly because I lived it, is that the people who come for what you've built rarely announce themselves. They don't arrive with bad intentions written plainly on their face. Preston shook hands well. He remembered names. He said the right things at the right moments. What he lacked wasn't charm. What he lacked was the kind of integrity that holds even when no one's watching. Even when the person across the table is grieving and tired and 67 years old and maybe, just maybe, easier to move than usual. That's the thing about character. It doesn't show up in the good years. It shows up in the folder on the kitchen table 4 months after your wife dies. I was not a perfect father. I was not always home when I should have been. I worked long hours, and I trusted that the life I was building would speak for itself when the time came. Maybe it did, and maybe it didn't. My daughter and I are still working through that, one Sunday at a time. But what I knew when Preston sat across from me was that I had not spent 31 years in engineering, learning to read contracts and assess risk just to hand that knowledge over to fear. I had a mind that still worked. I had Gord. I had Elaine's quiet foresight, those trust documents she'd arranged without fanfare, without drama, because she was the kind of woman who prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. That preparation saved the house. But more than the house, it saved me from becoming someone who let it happen without a fight. I think what people misunderstand about situations like mine is that the strength required isn't loud. It isn't confrontational. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't make accusations. I made phone calls. I kept a notebook. I updated documents. I asked Gord the right questions, and then I sat across from Preston at that estate reading, and I let the law do what the law is designed to do when it's been properly prepared. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this. Not just the legal piece, though please, talk to an estate lawyer, set up a proper trust. Don't wait until you're grieving to think about these things. I mean something older than that. The idea that clear thinking is an act of dignity, that knowing your own rights, understanding the documents in front of you, refusing to sign something just because someone patient is waiting, that is not stubbornness. That is the least you owe yourself. And the perseverance part, that's the part nobody talks about. It wasn't one phone call. It was 3 months of quiet, careful work while pretending nothing had changed. That takes something out of you, but it also puts something back. The maple tree goes red every October. I'm still here to watch it.